Cancer, listen carefully. There's a sound moving beneath the surface of your life right now. Not the footsteps of fear, but the trembling of the dark itself. Something ancient is waking. The walls that were built to hide the truth are cracking. And the whispers that once controlled the night are dissolving into silence. For too long, shadows have pretended to own your story. They dressed themselves as doubt, as delay, as quiet suffering. They told you to wait, to shrink, to protect yourself from your own light. But listen, that sound you hear beneath your life, it's not destruction. It's transformation. Because what's breaking is not your foundation, it's your limitation. Every secret, every silence, every pain that you buried, is rising now to be seen. This is not the collapse of your world, Cancer. This is your becoming. Can you feel it? The shift under your feet, the pulse behind your ribs, the moment where destiny stops waiting and starts knocking. You were never meant to stay hidden in the tide. You are the tide itself, the moon's chosen, the keeper of emotional truth. And tonight, the ocean inside you remembers who it is. So breathe. Let the old walls fall. Let the sound beneath your surface grow into your voice. Because this isn't a moment of fear. It's a moment of justice. The darkness is trembling because your light is finally moving. Welcome to Buddhist teachings, a sanctuary for those walking the path between silence and awakening. If this message found you at the right time, it's not by accident. The universe doesn't make mistakes. It makes appointments. So before we go deeper into today's revelation, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, not just to support this channel, but to affirm your place in this awakening. Because what's about to unfold isn't just a story. It's your story. And it begins right here, right now. When the light breaks in. Cancer's day of reckoning. Cancer, step closer. I speak as the witness of light, the quiet presence in the doorway when the switch flips and every contour of the room admits what it is. Tonight is not about vengeance. Tonight is about sight. You have walked through seasons of dim corridors, where the air was heavy with whispers and the furniture of trust never sat where you left it. You were told your intuition was too much. You were trained to doubt your own pulse. But light is not a rumor, and once it arrives, even the dust confesses. First, exposure. Imagine the room as it was, curtains drawn, yellow bulbs humming, a circle of faces that learned to smile with their mouths while tucking knives behind their backs. Somewhere, a notepad with shorthand that only the guilty could read. Somewhere, a key left under a flower pot that opened a cabinet of alibis. They thought shadows were insurance. They thought your silence was consent. Now the door cracks, and the beam widens. Paper trails that once looked like scribbles become maps. Emails line up like soldiers awaiting roll call. Dates connect. Motives thread through the fabric like a bright red stitch. The alliance that framed you, soft lies, quiet exclusions, slippery stories, buckles under the weight of its own arithmetic. The light doesn't raise its voice, it merely refuses to look away. That is how secrets end. Not with thunder, but with clarity. Then, judgment. Not the courtroom of spectacle, but the tribunal of reality. In Nuremberg, they said the record would save the future. In Watergate, tapes reminded power that history keeps receipts. Tonight, your life hosts its own hearing. Evidence is the usher. Conscience is the judge. People who profited from your doubt find themselves confronted by their signatures in the ledger of cause and effect. The first arrests begin, some visible, some invisible. Access is revoked. Influence is quietly escorted out. Masks are asked to remove themselves and step into the light for identification. The verdict is not cruelty, it is alignment. Each action returns to sender, stamped with a familiar truth. You cannot steal what you did not earn, you cannot bury what refuses to die. They are not condemned by your anger, Cancer. They are measured by the scale of the real. The sentence, if you can call it that, is simple. Consequences. Finally, liberation. You do not exit the room by hurling the furniture. You open the windows. Light pours across the floorboards and finds a photograph you once hid, a younger you who still believed that love would be enough to make liars honest. Keep that faith, and update it. Justice is love applied to patterns. Boundaries are love with a spine. Forgiveness is not amnesia. It is refusing to rent your heart to the past. As the room breathes, you notice something startling. You were never the prisoner. You were the witness being matured, the archivist of your own becoming. The files you've collected, memories, instincts, small inconsistencies, have become the Rosetta Stone of your freedom. You can read your life now. You can translate pain into parameters, loyalty into agreements, care into contracts that honor your tide and your time. I will not romanticize the ache. Exoneration still leaves a bruise where the blade attempted its thesis. But the bruise is a teacher. It reminds you that your softness is not a liability. It is a radar calibrated to the unseen. The very sensitivity they mocked is the lantern that guided you to this threshold. And here is the quiet miracle. When light breaks in, you do not just see them, you see you. You see the pattern of your endurance, the way you kept showing up even when you had to carry your own name like a shield. You see the architecture of your new room. Windows on every wall, locks that answer only to your courage, a table wide enough for the honest to sit and eat. So say it with me, in the cadence of a vow, I will not apologize for the light I live in. I will not shrink to keep anyone comfortable in the dark. I will not trade my knowing for their approval. Tonight, I retire from the role of the accused and accept the mantle of the acquitted. Not by their permission, by the testimony of truth itself. Cancer, the doors are open, the files are indexed, the hour is named. Can you feel it? The old alliance dissolves like fog under noon. The room that once tried to contain you becomes a hallway. The hallway becomes a horizon. Step through. The light has entered, and so have you. Cancer, it's time. The courtroom above. Cancer's sacred verdict. Cancer, you have carried the ocean inside your chest long enough to learn that silence is not emptiness. It is storage. It keeps receipts. It remembers tides, birthdays, broken promises, and the small tremors that others pretend not to feel. Tonight, the floorboards of your life loosen not to collapse you, but to release what was trapped beneath them. I've long believed that suffering has a hidden curriculum. It trains the intuition to speak in frequencies others miss. You felt the draft through sealed windows, the pressure drop before the storm, the pattern behind the accidents. What you sensed was real, not paranoia, but pattern recognition matured by time. In prophetic storytelling, exposure is the first bell. Like the moment the priest lifts the veil, or when ancient scribes rolled open the parchment that kings hoped would stay shut. We are here, the room grows brighter, and the edges of the story take shape. Every whisper that once stalked you now leaves footprints in wet clay. Evidence begins with feeling, and your feelings have finally become admissible. Now look up. The scene changes. We are summoned to a courtroom that isn't built of stone but of clarity. Pillars of radiance, benches of breath, and a bench where the judge is neither cruel nor sentimental, only true. I call this space the High Registry, where actions leave signatures that time cannot smudge. Here, the ledger opens, and something startling happens. The accusations that were hurled at you reverse their polarity. They boomerang, not from revenge, but from alignment. The ancients spoke of Marat weighing the heart against a feather. The Buddhists placed the Dharma wheel at the center of governance. In my view, these weren't fantasies but metaphors for a physics of ethics. Cause does not merely precede effect, it converges with it. In that convergence, intention is the stamp, behavior the ink. Those who drafted stories to make you small discover their own handwriting on the warrant. Judgment at this altitude is clean. No gavel slams. The room inhales. And the verdict, already formed in heaven, only waits for its echo on earth. Judgment descends like rain on stone. No drama, just persistence. This is the second bell. Fanzet, the measured return. Some will call it karma, others consequence. I call it restoration, because the point is not to scorch the field but to re-water it. People ask me, when will justice come? My answer is unfashionable but faithful. When the story is legible. Time is the co-judge that allows ink to dry so the page can be read. Watch how it happens. Invitations quietly rescind. Masks grow heavy. Alignments realign. The room that once excluded you needs what only you can bring. Your steadiness, your compassionate memory, your refusal to pretend the tide doesn't move. Notice, too, how your body changes when the burden lifts. Shoulders unlearn the flinch. Breath returns home. You do not need a spectacle to be vindicated. You need continuity. And continuity is what you are made of. Remember, a lighthouse never chases ships, it stands, and in standing, it governs the waters around it. Liberation is the third bell, and it sounds softer than people expect. Not a shout, but a door unlatching. You will feel it as permission to spend your energy on growth rather than defense, to plan years instead of days, to trust your own yes again. I've come to see liberation not as an exit but as an entrance, the doorway back into your unbroken self. The courtroom of light doesn't end with punishment, it culminates in placement. You are placed where your gifts have purchase. Your care ceases to be exploited and begins to be invested. Your boundaries, often misread as coldness, reveal themselves as architecture, the lines that allow a sanctuary to exist. Here's my counsel, offered with the tenderness you've earned. Forgive strategically, remember accurately, and build deliberately. Justice has done its part. Now do yours. Sign your days with courage. Spend your loyalty on people who are building rooms with windows. And when the old voices try to draft you back into the dark, answer with the calm of someone who has seen the transcript. The case is closed above. You are free to live the outcome below. Cancer, take your seat at the table you once set for everyone else. Let your wisdom, not your wounds, do the talking. History honors those who convert their scars into maps. Tonight, your map is approved by the courtroom above. Go where it points. Build what it blesses. And let the tide you carry lift the harbors that deserve to remain. When the storm bows, Cancer on the high ridge. Cancer, listen. I speak as the witness of light, the calm figure on the ridge when the valley begins to roar. Sirens in the distance, floodwater rising, debris racing like a stampede, and yet you are not swept away. You are where granite remembers the sea and refuses to move. This is the hour the storm is forced to kneel. Not before your anger, but before your alignment. First comes exposure, the great unmasking. Storms have always been historians. They peel paint from the signboards and make architecture tell the truth. Down in the lowlands, where whispers traded like currency and favors felt heavier than facts, the water climbs the steps of secrecy. Rooms where schemes were stitched begin to float apart. Ledgers bleed ink. Promises written on sand dissolve back into sand. In every era, from the markets that buckled under their own illusions to empires that mistook fear for loyalty, the same law held. Pressure reveals structure. Tonight, it reveals yours. You learn to check the doors before sleep, to trust the smallest sensation in your ribcage, to keep a clean inventory of what you can prove and what you will no longer carry. The flood does not erase you. It erases the fog around you. Then comes judgment, not the spectacle of punishment, but the geometry of consequence. Water follows gravity. Choices follow pattern. For years you were told your care was weakness, your caution paranoia, your tenderness a negotiable term. But the storm is impartial. It simply tests foundations. Those who built on borrowed integrity feel the floor tilt. Those who framed you to make themselves taller lose the scaffolding they stole. And you, steady on the ridge, recognize that protection is not a miracle that happens to the lucky. It is the natural result of living in truth long enough for the weather to notice. My opinion, offered without apology. Gentleness, when disciplined, is engineering. It is rebar in concrete. It does not announce itself, yet bridges hold because of it. Protection, in its truest form, is placement. Noah had an ark. You have altitude and clarity. You learned the shape of your own boundaries and you stopped treating hope like a floodgate. You learned to say no without an alibi and yes without self-betrayal. Think of a lighthouse lens gathering scattered photons into a single blade of sight. That is your intuition now. It does not panic. It focuses. You look across the valley and understand who was water to you and who was weight. You look behind you and see the long line of elders, those who survived dust bowls, wars, recessions, private griefs with public faces, teaching the same lesson in different weather. Choose the high ground early and protect the ground that protects you. Liberation is the part nobody describes well, because it feels like silence at first. After thunder, the world is too clear. The air tastes like metal and mint. In that quiet, you hear your own life without interference, The steady beat of a heart that refused to be drafted into other people's battles. The clean click of a door that now opens only to kindness. The small, brave laugh that belongs to a person who remembers their future again. You are not vengeful, you are precise. You send back what never belonged to you. Guilt that wasn't yours, debts you didn't sign, narratives that used your name as a costume. You keep what is yours, dignity, craft, time, and the right to love without making yourself a human levy against someone else's tide. If there is a vow to speak, let it be simple and ceremonial. I stand on the ridge. I am held by what holds. I will not descend into the valley to prove I can swim in someone else's flood. I will be water when it is time to nourish, rock when it is time to anchor, and wind when it is time to move on. My sensitivity is not a storm door. It is a weather station. It does not make me fragile, it makes me forewarned. Cancer, the storm did not come to cancel you. It came to confirm you. You are the witness, not the wreckage. You are elevated, not dragged. The valley will dry and green again, and people will ask how you stayed so calm while everything shook. Tell them the truth. You practiced being the mountain until the mountain recognized you. And when the sky finally cleared, you didn't gloat. You opened your hands to the sun, felt the warmth return to your palms, and stepped forward, not to survey the damage, but to cultivate the new ground that honesty leaves behind. Cancer, the storm has bowed. Stand as you are. It's time. When the dark eats itself. Cancer and the harvest of consequence. Cancer, come closer. I speak as the witness of light, as the still figure at the doorway when a crowded room turns on itself. You have been told to swallow your hunches, to file your instincts under too sensitive, to apologize for noticing what didn't add up. Yet the night has a habit of consuming whatever it shelters too long. Alliances forged in secrecy eventually choke on their own smoke. What you are watching is not chaos. It is arithmetic arriving at its answer. The exposure begins quietly, like dawn slipping under a curtain. The same people who once rehearsed laughter in low-lit corners begin correcting each other in public. Whispered stories sprout contradictions. Private jokes turn into open cross-examinations. What held them together was never loyalty, only the thrill of a shared target. Remove the target and the glue dissolves. History has always known this rhythm. Think of the feuds that cracked Tammany Hall, the way Watergate unspooled when self-preservation outran camaraderie, the market bubbles that burst because the lie needed more believers than the truth required witnesses. That is what you are seeing now, the math of motive, the physics of pressure, the biology of fear. Secrets rot. And rot never smells like roses for long. Judgment doesn't always arrive with a gavel. Sometimes it enters as a season. Friends who used your softness as free currency now compete to out-virtue one another. The same smile that once nodded along to your character assassination becomes a megaphone for moral outrage, against the very scheme it helped build. This is not hypocrisy as much as it is gravity. Every structure built on borrowed integrity eventually leans toward collapse. My view, offered without apology: consequences are not cruelty, they are compost. They return to the soil what was stolen from the light, and they make room for something honest to grow. Watch how access dries up. Watch how influence thins. Watch how the story refocuses itself around facts you never had to fabricate. Your role is not revenge, it is remembrance. You remember what actually happened, and the record begins to agree with you. Here is the irony that will set you free. You were never standing in the middle of their circle. You were always on higher ground, even when loneliness made you doubt the altitude. You are a water sign ruled by the moon. You understand cycles better than most. You know that tides reveal as much as they erase. You learned to call your boundaries by their names, to check your sources, to step back when the tone in the room asked you to trade your peace for proximity. Protection has looked, at times, like isolation. But look again. That distance was not punishment. It was positioning. Noah had an ark. You had discernment. The harvest showing up now is not random fortune. It is the inevitable fruit of living aligned long enough for the weather to notice. Liberation lands like a clear bell after the sirens. When coalitions built on shadow start cannibalizing themselves, something unclenches in your chest. You don't gloat. The victory is too sacred for that. You practice a different kind of power, the power of accurate naming. You return what isn't yours, the guilt that never fit, the shame stitched by other hands, the exhaustion of keeping everyone else comfortable. And you keep what is, your time, your craft, your right to thrive without negotiating against your intuition. At this stage of life, you are not auditioning for rooms that can't survive daylight. You are building tables where the honest can eat without watching the door. If you need a vow, let it be ceremonial and simple. I will not descend to prove I can swim in someone else's flood. I will not trade my knowing for applause. I will be water when it nourishes, rock when it must anchor, and wind when it is time to move on. This is not defiance, it is alignment. You are not required to carry the debris of other people's collapses as proof of your compassion. Compassion, matured, includes clean exits. So let the alliances in the dark do what they were born to do, implode. Each person will carry their portion of consequence because life is a meticulous bookkeeper. As the arguing grows louder and the circle shrinks, you step forward without fury, only clarity. You were cast as the victim, then trained to play the villain in their retelling. Not anymore. You are the witness who outlasted the plot. You are the one the light found first. And in this season of reaping, the field finally admits what it planted. Cancer, the night is eating itself. You are not the feast, you are the dawn. The season turns. Cancer, at the moment the darkness breaks. Cancer, listen closely. I speak as the witness of light, standing where summer loosens its grip and autumn draws a clean line through the air. You know this edge well, the hour when heat becomes harvest, when long shadows confess the shapes that cast them. For years you were told your intuition was too much, your memory too long, your care too tender. But you were not naive, you were early. The world is catching up to what you felt first. This is the tipping point, the precise click when the season shifts and the door of night finds its hinge. Exposure arrives the way dawn always arrives, not with permission, but with inevitability. Rooms that once hummed with private laughter now echo with the awkwardness of truth. The alliances that fed on secrecy begin to eat themselves, because deception is an organism that demands constant calories, and there is nothing left to chew but its own tail. You see it clearly. Stories that never agreed suddenly contradict loudly, timelines that were elastic snap back, and smiles trained for performance abandon their choreography. History keeps receipts, and consequence is a careful accountant. Think of the scandals that unraveled not through rage but through record, moments when the paper trail outlasted the performance. Your life now hosts its own reckoning. The evidence is quiet, and that is why it is powerful. Then judgment, which is less a spectacle than a symmetry. Gravity pulls water downhill. Truth pulls patterns into focus. This is not about punishing people. It is about letting reality finish its sentence. Those who borrowed your name to purchase their convenience find the credit limit reached. Those who profited from your silence discover that silence has matured into testimony. My stance, offered without apology. Compassion without boundaries is not compassion, it is leakage. Your tenderness, properly stewarded, becomes engineering. Rebar in the bridge that carries you across the next span of years. At 40, 60, 70, you understand that kindness needs a spine, and love, if it is truly love, aligns the messy ledger of cause and effect. You are not vengeful. You are accurate. Liberation does not arrive with fireworks. It arrives with breathable air. You open a window. The room stops smelling like yesterday. You return what is not yours, guilt tailored by other hands, debts you never signed, narratives that used your heart as a prop. You keep what is yours, time, craft, peace, the right to move at the speed of your nervous system instead of the speed of someone else's emergencies. Protection is placement. Noah had an ark. You have altitude. You chose higher ground long before the river decided to flood, and now the ridge reveals its purpose. Not isolation, but perspective. You can see who was water and who was weight. You can bless both and carry neither. Here is the pastoral truth our elders knew. Seasons turn whether we approve or not. The brave labor is to turn with them. You have carried homes, households, histories, and heartbreaks. You have been the person who remembered birthdays, packed lunches, paid invoices, and prayed prayers no one heard. You were called soft by people afraid of their own softness. Yet the moon that rules you, waxing, waning, has taught you a subtler math. Endurance is not stubbornness, it is belonging to cycles larger than pain. When the light returns, you do not gloat. You plant. You choose rituals that make room for the future you've earned. So we reach the crest. The split second the pendulum pauses and begins its swing toward morning. The line must be spoken aloud to become law in your nervous system. Let this be the public right, the banner raised at the city gate, the sentence that seals the season. Darkness is broken. Do not whisper it. Type it. Carve it into the digital shoreline where waves of doubt once came to erase your name. Write those 3 words in the comments as a vow to yourself and as a lighthouse to anyone still finding the shore. Darkness is broken. In that act, you refuse to negotiate again with a night that has already surrendered. You become participant, not spectator, co-author, not case file. Cancer, your task from here is tender and bold. Speak plainly. Love precisely. Guard the quiet that guards you. Build rooms that survive daylight. Let your intuition be a lens, not a liability. When people ask how you stayed steady while the weather raged, tell them the truth. You practiced being the season until the season remembered you. The long night has reached its hinge. The harvest begins. Darkness is broken, and so are the chains that once mistook you for their anchor. Step forward. The air is clear, the ground is good, and the future has already started saying your name. Cancer, listen carefully once more. The sound that began as a distant trembling beneath your life has now become the steady rhythm of revelation. What once hid in shadows has fallen silent. The walls that once confined you are gone, and what remains is the open horizon of truth. This is not the echo of fear you hear, it is the sound of chains falling. It is the sound of justice breathing again. Cancer, justice delayed was never justice denied. Every tear you shed has already been accounted for in the higher record. Every wrong that touched your life has already been answered by the light that now moves on your behalf. The reversal has begun. What they built in deceit has crumbled by its own design. What you built in silence now rises with power. Heaven has already started to restore what was taken. Do not fear the noise of collapse. Do not mourn what is being removed. Every fall you witness is clearing space for your peace. The flood may rage, but you stand above it. You are preserved, lifted, and protected. You are not standing in ruins. You are standing in renewal. The seed that was buried has pushed through the soil. You are that seed, and this is your season of light. The darkness is broken. Say it, Cancer. Type it. Declare it. Let your words become your banner, your public declaration that you have crossed the threshold. What once hunted you cannot follow you here. You are no longer defined by what was done against you, but by the power that raised you above it. Walk forward with courage. Do not look back at what has fallen behind. Those who walked in shadow are learning their lessons in the silence they once used against you. Your only task now is to rise, to live as proof that truth never dies, it only waits for its hour to shine. Your story is no longer one of oppression but of freedom. No longer one of silence but of vindication. The circle is complete. The beginning has met the end, and the end opens a new beginning. Cancer, your time is not coming. Your time is here. And it begins, now.